And now, for the second segment of our session, we are going to ask the Executive Director of Nedlac, Lisa Seftel, to please come onto the stage, joined by the representatives of the social partners, Mr. Tulane Chefuta, Mr. Solipetwe, as well as Mr. Kes Kuvadia. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for them. As they make their way up to the stage, I saw oh, there, okay, all right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We are now going to be receiving the PowerPoint presentation of the performance of Nedlac for the financial year 2023 to 2024 from the Executive Director of Nedlac, Ms. Lisa Seftel. And if you are ready, Lisa, the stage is yours. Let's put our hands together, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I think we heard a lot. There's a large group of people here, so I hope it's okay for me to say all protocol observed. So I'm going to be giving a presentation which is really going to focus on the performance of this last year, because that's what we do in our annual summit. But then I'm going to move to the current context and challenges of which you've already heard from the Deputy President, the Minister, as well as the ILO, but then say, I will also add to that the flavor of what social partners have been saying as we did our 30-year review, and then how could we be going forward. So just on Nedlac's performance, now I'm wondering, can you see this with all the people standing in the way? And I hope you can. So what characterized the last year? And I would say it was characterized by both continuity and change. What was the continuity? As Nedlac, we've become very good at doing information sharing and dialogues on key socioeconomic issues. We've continued to consider policies and bills, and we have a process whereby we engage with the government budget planning dialogue. There's also been change. We've had to prepare for the transition to the 7th administration, and we have used this time in the first half of the year to celebrate and reflect on 30 years of democracy. I also have to say that usually we spend a long time, detailed engagement on especially legislation, but because the 6th administration wanted to make quite sure that many bills were completed, I would say that we rushed it more than we would otherwise do. But I hope we still added to the quality of that legislation. We've done well. We met 92% of our targets. We do annually a stakeholder survey where 78% of our staff and 78% of our stakeholders and 84% of our staff were satisfied, which is all of you. We got a clean audit. And when we tracked, because we have a parliamentary tracker that tracks how many bills considered at Nedlac end up in Parliament, and over the 5-year period, many more bills did get to Parliament, and subsequently have been passed and promulgated by the President. Then just to look at, and I'm not going to go through the details, but to remind all of you of what you contributed to, and to indicate the breadth of issues that we discuss in Nedlac. And I think, as we've indicated earlier on, yesterday we had an information sharing symposium with other countries in Africa with similar institutions. And I think there was it was important dialogue about how some institutions only focus on the labor market and how others, including in French-speaking Africa, have a much broader mandate, and how that enriches social dialogue. So the policies we looked at was electricity pricing, although I did hear that the new minister is indicating that it's starting again, but that's always good. Master skills plan, schools issues, and then the very important national labour migration policy, which the Department of Employment and Labour is responsible for. When it came to bills, we did a lot of work on the Mine Health and Safety Amendment Bill, although it's not, neither at that or the next one is not yet in Parliament. Victim Support Bill, National Water Resource Agency Bill, I think has been passed and signed, and the Radioactive Waste Management Bill. Then on the key dialogues, I indicated before, we did work on the government budget planning, and a lot of work in the run-up to AGOA, and also earlier this year in preparation for the WTO. We have a lot of engagement on energy, electricity, freight, and public transport. And you can see on the other side the dialogues that we had, and again, the range of issues that we have been seized with. And again here, this is in relation to labour and development. You can see the extent to which we have engaged. A big issue for Nedlac, an ongoing issue, has been, what can I say, the legacy or the backlog arising out of the work we did on COVID-19 and the need for income replacement. And we've tried to do a lot of work on the cost of living, and the Deputy President indicated that this is a focus area for this new government. It hasn't been an area of enormous success because those issues are quite complicated, but hopefully an ongoing area of concern. Our last summit last year focused on responding to crises. So we have looked also at how there can be better responses to disaster management, linked to the issue of the food prices, red tape in the distribution of food and donations, and then a number of other areas where really we share information to build understanding between the social partners. Now, as was indicated, the Presidential Climate Commission has been with us. It's a fourth program of ours, as it builds its own institution since October 2022. They made a number of important recommendations on electricity planning, the review of the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, the state of climate action. They had site visits and a lot of studies on what happened in Komati, and they made a number of recommendations, and they've also done work on South Africa's climate finance landscape, and a lot of engagements and consultations, particularly on the ground, and particularly in Mpumalanga, which is the province that is going to be the soonest and most hardest hit by some of the implications of a just transition, or hopefully will, to enable that the transition in Mpumalanga would be more just. Then, just other key areas of our work. The Minister referred to the issue of labour law reform, and all the former overall conveners there on my far left will know that this is the heart of Nedlac, being able to respond to the changes in the labour market with changes to legislation. And it is always an enormous source of debate about how flexible or how regulated we want the labour market to be. Over the period, there was a lot of discussion about negotiations, amendments, and we built an infrastructure around that with a facilitator, legal drafters, and technical support. The result of that are over 60 amendments to our labour laws, which hopefully will go to Parliament in the next forthcoming period. So, honourable members of Parliament, there's a lot of work coming your way. The other thing that we've done this year is that we have revised our constitution to improve the functioning of Nedlac. In fact, one of the things that we revised, Bekin Chali from Organised Labour, the former convener, is that in our constitution, I think it was the deputy president, or I'm not sure who, that would chair these summits. But now we said, no, anybody can chair from any constituency. So that's why we now have organised business chairing today. So we've modernized our constitution, and We have a new Nedlac bill, which I think is already on its way to Cabinet, and then it will go to Parliament, we hope, which really will also assist to improve political accountability and representativity. There have been a number of calls that as our society becomes diverse, in all constituencies, business, labor, and community or civil society, we need to create space for that diversity in the Nedlac legislation. And then this year, there was still, COVID is an ongoing legacy for us. In fact, I'm not seeing anybody here wearing a mask, but it's part of the COVID legacy. But we also ran a very successful program aimed at occupational health and safety practitioners and staff stewards on how to ongoingly respond to COVID-related issues. And in fact, recently, we've also been looking at the issue of heat stress, which is a climate change impact, and whether the Department of Employment and Labour does have regulation on this, but it's unknown. It's not well known. It's not well understood by practitioners. And this might be something that we would also want to do going forward. Now, I'm going to move off our performance, and I'm going to go to the current context. So I think we can say that we're meeting at a time when there are challenges and opportunities. And this is what I'll be looking at in the next slides. But these little circles, some of which you can't see properly. But I took these wordings from what the overall convener said in our annual report, or what our social partners have said about the GNU. For Labour, they've said it's uncharted waters. So behind that bullet is actually a picture of former President Trump, but I think it can apply even to our situation. That's how some people see the GNU. Right down there, it says bad political choice. I won't say who said that. Organized business and others have said new energy, I think in government. Others have said cautious optimism and renewed business confidence. So amongst our social partners and in society, the verdict of the GNU is still out. And that's an opportunity, as the Deputy President was saying, about how can social partners confirm a positive verdict. Because we are faced with systemic and structural unemployment and domestic and global shocks. These two slides come from the 30-year review and the work that government has been doing in preparation for the 7th administration. And you can see the challenges. The other thing that I think social partners reflected when we did the 30-year process is the ongoing significant threat of climate change. It's not something theoretical. This is eteguini. And increasingly, there are threats that we're all having to face around increases in temperature. The other issue which the PCC has been highlighting most recently is the fact that our carbon-intensive economy, and you can see we are right up there, exposes us to adverse economic shocks because there is an initiative, particularly from Europe, but also from America, to introduce carbon border adjustment mechanisms. So if we want to export a car that is made in some of our factories using coal-based energy, they don't want it. They will no longer trade with us, as well as changing consumer sentiments. These are big emerging issues for us. We also live in an uncertain world. The geopolitical situation in the Middle East and Europe has led to political tensions, economic strains, global supply chain disruptions. I remember when there was the AGOA summit. It was an ambiguous issue, particularly for organized labor and community, about whether they should be going to the AGOA summit at the same time when America was supporting some of the military activities in Ukraine and Israel. Then there is also, and I think the ILO DG mentioned it, digitalization and AI bring additional risks, job displacement, fake news, and so on. Now, this is a slide that I found, I think, from the HSRC, because often we always see the same slide, so same pictures. This is telling us that the government and the economy, that people perceive that the government and the economy are not doing well. 51% of South Africans are not proud of the way democracy works, and 57% are not proud of the nation's economic achievements. And then, also from the HSRC, public trust in political institutions is low. Just about 2 out of 3 South Africans do not trust our political institutions. And that's why those of us here that are attempting to build trust have an important leadership role to play. So what is our challenge? At the heart of rebuilding public trust in government and social stability is the imperative to deliver services to enable a growing economy that will create employment opportunities, reduce inequality and poverty, and cushion those who are vulnerable due to our past legacy and future threats. And this was a big theme from our deliberations in the working sessions on the 30-year review of social partners. We have to balance initiatives for inclusive growth with ways to cushion those that are vulnerable in the context of to achieve social stability, and we have to do so with, as the Minister of Finance tells us, reduced fiscal resources. And that's what that slide on the right shows us. There is, and this is what our 30-year report says, a narrow window of opportunity involving difficult decisions about revenue sources, spending, and partnerships. What is the window? That the GNU has provided, political and business confidence has been strengthened on the hope of the success of the GNU. Momentum, and I think we read about it often and we hear about it from our social partners, that there is increased momentum to end energy, freight, and other related crises has increased. There are stronger institutions, and there is greater support for institutional reform. And we would say that the turning points have been reached in key SOEs. So the opportunity is to nurture the GNU in a fragile environment. It is our best and only option. But also to be one step ahead, and I'll come back to that on my next slide. Then to plan increasingly for future risks before they eventualize in the current. I'm struck often that we talk a lot about we have to redress the legacy of apartheid, and we do. Our challenge now is that there's going to be a future legacy that around climate change that we have to address proactively. So we have to be able to redress the past and plan to do more redress for what we did in the past, which is impacting on the future. And this is where we come in, to consolidate social partnerships, to grow the trust, the legitimacy, and to ensure speedier delivery. I thought here, and I just use the example of the energy space, because as Nedlac social partners, we've been very involved in this. And we've made significant efforts to end load shedding. And it's a big breath of fresh air. But we still face issues: affordability, distribution, transmission, emissions, and transitions. And to be able to achieve this step ahead, it requires a significant amount of consensus to holistic and sustainable solutions. And the graph here just shows how much electricity prices are increasing. This is putting it in a more straightforward way. So what is the opportunity for social partnership? Yes, there are differences between social partners, but there's significant consensus on key issues impeding South Africa: structural reforms, infrastructure development, social wage and social security, skills, and the need to improve state capacity to local government. There are differences. Whenever we have our government budget dialogue, there are big differences about what should happen around the government debt. Recently, there has been a public engagement about the differences around national health insurance and the National Social Compact. There is an opportunity that it can still come back into Nedlac. Again this week, there's a difference around the Tobacco and Electronic Products Bill. And Nedlac and the social partners are keen, want to appeal to the Department of Health. Let's bring it back. We have the mechanisms in Nedlac to achieve a more workable consensus rather than a litigious route. There is that rich history of social partnership. Nedlac has stayed the course for 30 years, as well as birthing many other social partner initiatives and institutions. So lastly, I'm going to talk about the future of social partnership and dialogue. And again, I've quoted from my annual report, the Minister, Nedlac's role becomes increasingly vital in fostering sustainable economic growth. Kaiser Moyali from Organized Business, Nedlac should continue to play a pivotal role in nation building. Tulani, you'll hear from him soon. Nedlac must take an interest in entrenching democracy. Temikosi Mkalipi from government. We must double our resolve to address stubborn challenges. And Gerald Twala from Organized Labor, they're warning us about the uncharted waters. So what then is the future? As has been indicated already, we embarked on this process, and we are revealing today our 30-year report. And it's a short document. It's readable, we hope. Mr. Mashaba, unlike the 30-year document, which is a long one, the government's one is long. So we hope that you'll read it. And we're handing over the report to the 7th administration. But the process allowed us to reflect on our achievements in social partnership. And one of the things we learned, I think the Deputy President, he talked about the work we did on the Economic Recovery and Reconstruction Plan. And what we kept on saying then is, we've got to do a few things well if you want to turn the country around. Well, we've now got 12 areas, but it's still focused areas. And we believe that social partners in Nedlac can move to a new level of partnership, becoming proactive rather than reactive. We're very good. In fact, we're often better at responding to crises than other things. But let us now become proactive, because we must plan and prepare for the crises that we know may come. And I also, so we can build on the responses of the last 5 years. And I also quoted here our chairperson today, that we do achieve much when the government and private sector work together in a productive way that draws on the strengths of our parties. And that's another advantage of Nedlac, is that we can draw on the strengths of all of you from your various constituencies. So the areas of social partnership priority areas, I won't go through them in a lot of detail. Some of them are existing areas of partnership. Organized Business and Business for South Africa have pioneered these partnerships for inclusive growth. And there is an intention, I think it was already in the President's State of the Opening of Parliament Address, OPA, that it needs to shift to areas of water, local government, and we also suggested ICT. And then social partners, not necessarily in Nedlac, have pioneered these master plans led by former Minister Patel around sector master plans, but it's the same principles of social dialogue. The view when we were meeting was, we need to prioritize certain ones that are key levers to manage a transition to more inclusive growth. Those being renewable energy, auto, iron, and steel sectors. Then, ongoingly, the importance about cushioning unemployment, employment creation and public employment schemes. And when we were, again, in the 30-year review, there was a big call for greater agglomeration and acceleration. And also from Nedlac many years ago, or not so many years ago, I'm not sure, National Treasury, there was the introduction of employment tax incentive, which is a tax incentive to employ young people. It can do more. And it's the way in which business can contribute to employment creation. On addressing hunger and poverty, in Nedlac for a long time, we had a comprehensive social security strategy, and there's a call, particularly from the community constituency, that we need to revive that. And particularly, we have to revive it in the context of climate change. And it's not only about looking at public grants, it's also about how do pension schemes change in the context of early retirement when coal mines, for example, may have to retire. We need to sharpen existing delivery mechanisms. For example, one of the things when you're looking at the high cost of living is, would it be better if a pregnant mother would get a social grant? And there's a lot of debate about that. But if every mother got a child grant the moment the child was born, it would be better than because our service mechanism is ineffective and they only get the grant a year later. Which links us to the need for targeted interventions to improve food security amongst children. In respect to the labour market, there are two key areas that came up. The issue of a reformed and modernised UIF system. And it has to be, the UIF was built, Minister, for temporary, on the assumption that it was for temporary unemployment between jobs. That's not what we're facing now. We're facing a situation where, yes, there are situations of temporary unemployment when your factory is flooded, like what happened with Toyota in 2021, I think, as well as permanent unemployment because of some of the terrible, of what might happen with some just transitions in digitalization as a result of climate change. A reformed workplace skills system, I think there's a big acknowledgement by, see, I'm looking in this direction and business is right on the side, around we need to do more. It's linked to employment around skills. And then lastly, about a responsive and capacitated government, particularly on local government, and then the need to build an active and productive partnership between public sector leaders, management, and workers. And lastly, again, because we're having more frequent floods, only a couple of months ago, there were terrible floods in part of the Western Cape, and it emerged that the dams that were flooding were not dams owned by the state. They were dams owned, I'm not sure who, but some private landowners. We have to have a multi-stakeholder response to issues like disasters. So then, just to indicate, and I think both the Minister and the Deputy President indicated, the priority areas of government, which are about on the left-hand side, and you can see that there is strong alignment between government's priorities and the areas that social partners would want to work with government on. So then, what does this mean for Nedlac? As I indicated, this year was one of continuity and change, and going forward, we think there needs to be further continuity and change. Our ongoing dialogues is an area of continuity. To facilitate and complement bilateral and sectoral social dialogue, initiatives, and collaborations. The labour law reform, you know, we'll never finish Johnny Goldberg labour law reform because the labour market is always changing. So it is better that we amend some laws where we reach consensus and we go to Parliament. And then the next year, we review the labour market again. And I think the Commission, when we discussed this, was saying, let Nedlac even set up a capacity to be able to monitor the changes in the labour market so that we can be responsive to these changes. So it should be seen as an ongoing process. And then the ongoing engagement on socioeconomic policies and bills. What can be the change? Firstly, to collaborate proactively, like a little bit we did with COVID, with public milestones. And I think it also came up in the 30-year process, that we need to set milestones that the public knows about on identified priority areas. There clearly is an increasing need for synergy between the Presidential Climate Commission, which is providing advice and research, and what we need to do in Nedlac. Because the PCC can make a recommendation on, or can give us a report on the problems of heat stress in the workplace. But it is only the social partners that can negotiate and agree on a regulation or a code of good practice on heat stress in the workplace. And then the issue about stronger mechanisms to monitor and evaluate the implementation of laws and policies. And honourable members from Parliament, it's to complement the work that you do, because ultimately government departments need to report to Parliament. But there is value when social partners have spent a lot of time understanding an issue, like I always use the issue of the border management policy, to then be able to hear from the Department of Home Affairs or that institution that's been set up about how they're doing, and to continue to give feedback. And then lastly, to consider developing, codifying and extending partnerships with the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, also because of the monitoring and the policy role, as well as potentially, it was raised, provincial and at sector levels, like with the master plans. So then in conclusion, colleagues, just to, I think in summary, last year we said we face a polycrisis. Let's not run away from it. We still face a polycrisis with fiscal constraints and the impact of climate change, both physically and economically, being the most prominent. But there is optimism. There is an opportunity. There's that narrow path of change to balance reform for inclusive growth with cushioning of business, workers, and communities. And the lessons from the 30 years of democracy show us that where social partners share similar concerns in critical areas, there's a solid basis for partnerships. Thank you.